Dum diddy dum dum bum 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 bum. Sun tea. Hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are, however you got here, whatever you're doing here. Thank you for showing up. Welcome. Yeah, Denise Matto here, and I guess I am gonna continue ranting on what I have called a cult being born or an emerging cult that's being organized by a couple of uh, Christian Reform Church of North America, CRCNA. You Google that, you'll find various official websites. And it's a generally liberal, Lutheran oriented, reformer, traditional Protestant denomination. But there are two pastors who are really part of the culture. I mean, it's like their family culture. They're not opportunists who suddenly decided to label themselves with some denomination so they could start their own thing. Uh, a pastor, John Van Donk, and Paul Vanderklay. Paul Vanderklay is the one that I've been focused on as being apparently organizing and setting up what I'm calling a radicalization cult. It's not a cult designed to be big and funnel money and turn him into the next Kenneth Copeland. Um, but it's a cult designed to function with a apparently benign front of liberal Christian and Christian adjacent belief systems. Actually a very nice social fellowship sort of organization, but embedded in it is a funnel to pull people into a very distinct, violent, left wing radicalization process. That's my opinion about what I'm seeing. And in order for this to be accomplished, if indeed it is going on, and go over my videos and make up your own mind, um, it's not required that most of the participants in the estuary conferences be okay with or even conscious of the funnel. Most of them see the political maneuverings and manipulations by Paul Vanderklay, Mark D. Parker, and Grim Griswold, the three most visible of the cluster of about a half a dozen, most less than half a dozen. Um, Most people just see that stuff as being, well, Paul's he's a little bit of a slime ball, trying to build the channel, grifting and stuff. A click grifter, you might say. Mark D. Parker is delusional, a dangerous delusional, and he's the one who's really pulling on the violin. And I'm going to focus on him in this video because he did it again. Um, and Grim Griswold, of course, is also part of the screening, profiling, and gatekeeping who gets pushed into the radicalization process. Grim Griswold is actually an active member of a well-known online political group that some people think is an actual CIA front. It has involved people claiming to be former CIA agents. Not just claiming, but really are former. But that doesn't really tell you that it's really a CIA project because you don't know why they're former. Some of them might have got fired for being nuts. And they're a lot, it's a free country. You can go out and say, well, yeah, I was in the CIA. You don't have to tell people you were in the CIA for 6 weeks of a training program before they asked you to leave and don't come back. But that's neither here nor there. The point is the Cicada 3301, the Isaac Cappy suicide / murder conspiracy, the Pizzagate Voodoo Donut conspiracies all revolve around the same cluster of people, of which Grim Griswold is a very active participant to this day. And he is also very actively involved in helping Paul Vanderklay structure the funnel of this cult. Now, it sounds like I'm being extreme. I'm being a little bit, drinking a little bit too much conspiracy tea myself. Every time I say, you're right, I'm taking this too far, they turn around and they do something that proves I didn't go far enough. Okay, things are ramping up in the political world. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, the ICE agents who focus particularly on the illegal aliens, but as part of the DHS, they're busting illegals who are members of transnational and international gangs, like the Tanagua people. I think they're from Venezuela. The MS-13. They're violent crowds. I mean, the Tanagua have actually taken over whole apartment complexes in Colorado. And, we're having to use the National Guard to fight these people. This is war. In fact, this is where the change comes. In the last week, President Trump has made some statements using the word war. The recent declaration, the Antifa, with which Mark D. Parker seems to be, I wouldn't say affiliated, but he's promoting their racial exploitation politics. He's promoting the street violence. And it gets worse because Vanderklay just did something in his X page that fulfills something I noticed early on. Um, but anyway, what we're seeing in the street, regardless of what Estuary is doing, is that the ICE raids have been focused primarily on illegal aliens, but they've also been setting up these deportation detention centers where, of course, they're talking to these gang members as they're putting them on the plane to go home. Some of them might be cutting deals and stuff. We don't know. But they're finding out who they are working with who are American citizens. That would be people like Mark D. Parker. Now, he's not working with the illegals. He's working on the American side of pressuring Christians to accommodate the rape and murder of our own children by these illegals. And he's working with the left wing to present that brown people have a culture that we just don't understand. I'm going to get to that in a minute, too. He's going on, the stuff he's saying today is disgusting. But this is the radical, but that's how you radicalize a Christian. You pull a conservative Christian into a fuzzy wuzzy, we really don't have the right to judge kind of theological argument system. And based on what kind of characteristics that person shows, the leadership comes around and supports getting them involved with the actual organization. And Estuary is a physical organization of actual conferences. A number of these Christian nationalist groups that run essentially the politics that Parker is running, except Parker is trying to pretend to be a left winger. A number of them use the book conference lecture circuit as an organizing vehicle because it's very effective. You find a group of compatible publishers, authors, artists who can give speeches, and you hire them, you pay them, you have a conference, you sell their books. In the meantime, you work the crowd. You have the people physically there. And they went through the stage of starting that to where they built it up to where they had over 300 people at their last conference up in Chicago. Now they're building into the political side. They weren't putting out the political stuff that they've put out this last 24 hours. Um, Mark D. Parker has a stream up. I can't think of what he's calling it. It's his House of Wu, the latest House of Wu. I don't know what the subtitle on it is, but he's talking about lynchings. And he's presenting the history of racial lynch crimes, which goes on into modern times. I mean, he's presenting it as if it's a universal American experience, as if it's a universal, all rural white people are. No, actually, if you look at the statistics, the actual facts about what you might call lynch culture, you're looking mostly at Northeast Texas. You're looking at Alabama, Mississippi. You're looking at a section of the South. And you can go in all kinds of directions with the discussions of why that was so. And to some extent still is. Anyone can research it. Start with the word lynching, put in history, lynching, Texas. That will be a starting point. You'll find stuff. You don't need me to feed you links. So what Mark Parker is doing, he's pulling up the same left-wing pseudo-Christian video publisher that he used before to try to promote violence on behalf of George Floyd, trying to promote that the American Black community wants the riots of BLM, that the American Black community supports the wholesale grift and fraud and destruction of their neighborhoods by the people who organized the Black Lives Matter movement. The American Black community is angry, very angry. In fact, they're beginning to show up with guns and not be arrested to confront Antifa when Antifa and other BLM types come into their neighborhoods. And they're doing it without any white leadership egging them on. If you look at this little racist monster, Mark D. Parker, and his white face and his white pastor friend, Paul Vanderklay, and that little white surrealistic artiste, Grim Griswold, but particularly Vanderklay and Parker. They're the ones really playing the Christian crap. All of their group, they call it the TLC, this little corner associated with the Estuary, they all have this mutual admiration society going on. 100% white, affluent American liberal. No black people in there. There is one black guy who shows up in some of their streams that I've seen. I've only seen this one guy. He speaks with a British accent. I don't know which part of the Anglophone world he's from, but he's from somewhere where they speak with a distinctly British accent. And he's clearly not an American Black. Nothing else, nothing bad to say. I'm just saying that's the only guy that shows up. Vanderklay runs a church where he has window dressing on his website of black families at some kind of church, festival or supper or something like that. But you don't see any black people anywhere in this group. But there's Vanderklay and Parker, mainly Parker, beating the drum of black ghetto violence, the same exploitation by the filthy white crackers that did the lynchings, and some of whom, if they can get away with it, still do. Different kind. There have been crimes, and if you go through various racial crimes that have taken place, in particularly up around Tyler, Texas, you'll see that in different forms, it's still going on. um, that's Parker's people that are doing that, because what Parker's doing is trying to emphasize that Black Americans are ghetto culture. And what he did was he takes this violent left wing creep, and I'm not even going to try to find the guy's name. It's if you go to Mark D. Parker's channel, which is under the name Mark D. Parker, all one word, in YouTube, you'll see that in his postings, he loves to post this guy's clips, and they're always underscoring race-based violence, which this affluent California white boy, along with his affluent California white pastor buddy, Paul Vanderklay, they want to see black blood in the streets. And they want to wash themselves in the blood of those lambs so that they can stand up and proclaim themselves some kind of, I don't know what. But that's exactly what they're doing. And Vanderklay recently had some streams talking about World War II, moving the whole estuary thing into the political realm. Okay, so he's begun over the past week or so really pushing, let's get into real warfare politics. At the same time as Parker continues with this desperate effort to funnel, unfortunately, naive, ivory tower intellectual, affluent young white men, suburbanites, many of whom, I mean, most of whom do have plenty of experience with Black friends at work and in real life, to know that Parker is blowing through smoke, but they're not really challenging him. And there is a thing where guys, you know, you can have black guys at work and white guys at work, and they're working together in the same office or, you know, mechanic's garage or wherever they're working. And they present a certain face to each other at work. They may even go out for a drink together, but they maintain separateness of their cultures. So sometimes, and I've seen it in real life, I live in a mixed race neighborhood, and in fact, I'm caught in a mutual friendship between an extremely racist East Texas white cracker who's so racist that he didn't realize, he didn't know my last name, and he felt like he had to warn me that somebody I was talking to who was just moving in a couple of years ago, Miss D, that there's a coon ass. Coon ass means Cajun. I said, oh, really? And I turned to the person he was warning me about, and we both continued our conversation in Cajun French and put him in his place right quick. Alongside him is another friend, black guy I've known for 15 years. He's worked in a lot of places around here. A big part of the neighborhood, just, you know, a familiar face in the neighborhood. And he's always ready to help somebody. He's country. And he and I have had an interesting friendship because of our arguments. Because I'm a New Englander and I grew up in the labor movement alongside the original Black Panthers, in the original labor movement, in the Vietnam Vets Against the War organization. You want to go into some serious challenges to the powers that be? You go look at the history of the VVAW, the Vietnam Vets Against the War. Google that. Now, those black guys were well read, well educated, because they were taught by teachers who taught all their children black and white in the school system. And many of them went to black schools in the segregated South. A black school was taught by a black teacher. That black teacher made sure those kids got respect and they learned how to read and write. There wasn't much mixture because, for one thing, in those days, it was actually illegal. You could go to jail for attempting to have a close friendship with a person of the opposite race. Black, and it was called miscegenation. I can't pronounce it. Miscegenation, mixing races. There were laws against it in southern states. There were laws against black and white sitting together in the bus or at lunch. When I moved to Texas, I discovered that in the little town I moved into, which is an extremely cracker town, the black folks were still using the back door to one of the main restaurants in town. And the custom still held. And I had stuff in a consignment shop in that town. And of course, we dealt with black and white customers all the time. And I saw the cultural distinction of how people behaved and how they were treated and how they treated each other. And I saw Jim Crow in real life, and it's still out there. Like I say, I'm living with this situation where this black neighbor and I, we've had up and down friendship because there are times when I just got so angry, I just said, don't even talk to me, leave me alone. Because he would shuck and jive. Because he's country from down here. And his whole education is under the white racist slave system. And the cracker next door, and what's going on now is we're all old. I mean, the black guy's the young one. But the cracker's my age almost. He's a little bit younger, but he's very sick. And lately we've been noticing he's not doing well. And the black guy keeps going over to try to help him out. And he gets all racist at him. And he's always coming over to the women in the block and telling us dirty. He doesn't do it to me anymore because I pretty much slapped him down. But if he sees any woman, white woman, talking to this guy at all, just even a friendly hello, he feels duty bound to walk up to her and explain the whole thing about that big black dong and what's going on here really. And it's like, get out of here, you stupid fool. I mean, this is life in a small Texas town, okay? So what I'm saying to you is I'm not coming at what Mark Parker is doing from an intellectual ivory tower. I was alongside black folks in the anti-war movement, of which the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement were heavily entangled because of the prevalence of black draftees sent against their will to combat in Vietnam, coming back educated on how to use guns properly, coming back educated on military discipline. That's what scared the heck out of the government about the original Black Panthers. The ones today are just a bunch of idiots. But the originals, they were just like the white militia. And we were alongside each other in the unions. We were alongside each other. Martin Luther King Jr. was not only speaking for black folks. He was unifying working class white and black together. People like Mark D. Parker in his little California affluent suburban stronghold have no clue about reality. He just sees the glory of violence. The black community, and I say this with full confidence, the black community is sick to death of being presented with ghetto crap by white assholes and being told that this is their culture. Because I remember their culture before people like Mark D. Parker got hold of it. Before the Jewish music producers destroyed jazz and shoved all the young black performers into gangster rap and hip hop. Everything got thrown into violence. Black education got destroyed. What they did was they did away with the segregated school system, which was a good thing to get rid of, but they very carefully instituted a new curriculum into the American public school system in which you can still maintain segregation, but you do it between individuals in the same classroom. That Black child does not get the same support and teaching to become a well rounded, well educated young adult as the white child gets. Because every time that Black child shows an interest in something other than sex, drugs, and performance, he gets told that he's not being true to his race. And he gets mocked and he gets attacked and bullied. And that's how it goes from the earliest grades all the way up through college. And we see it in Congress, where professionally behaved, well founded conservative Black politicians or statesmen or Congress people, whatever you want to call them, get attacked by the Democrat left wing that Mark D. Parker so admires. Now let's get back to what's Paul Vanderklay and Mark Parker doing to prove my point that they are working on, and this is setting up Estuary as a radicalization funnel. Mark had his stream today talking about lynchings, using lynching as a universal crime thing. You know, all white people do this all everywhere. And using it as, if you're Christian, how do you know, you have to speak up about this. Which obviously, any kind of gruesome crime. And I was glad to see at least one person in his stream trying to gently confront him about what he was actually saying. You know, you can present any kind of gruesome crime as a moral dilemma. Are you the Lord says, if you believe in me, you'll have everlasting life, but if you don't obey me, you won't have life, and the Lord's wrath will remain upon you. So, I mean, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it's the Bible verse that he's got on his thumbnail that he's using for his lynching propaganda. And he's very carefully bringing it all down to you're if you're not going to do what he wants people to do, which is join a BLM style violent thing, you're disobeying God. The posting that he put up, and he uses the clip in his stream, but you can see it in his postings, his community page, is that guy that I already mentioned, a very left wing, anti Christian guy who likes to pick apart Christian arguments. And they're talking about somebody referring to white nationalist liberals. And this is what's interesting, because in the stream, some of the other people showing up in the stream, they're all the white men of the TLC, are sort of confronting Mark Parker as being possibly a white nationalist liberal because of what he's doing. And the Christian in the clip is talking about, if you're an inclusive church and somebody Black comes to the door, you welcome them in. Okay. And the propaganda, the left wing that's kind of trolling him a little bit and, you know, trying to beat down on him for being a hypocrite, says, oh yeah, that's good, that's good. But then when this preacher goes on to say, but if you think you're going to bring Black culture in, No, that's not going to happen. Well, then, of course, the Mark D. Parker's good buddy starts attacking the guy as not really being Christian, without recognizing that although that preacher was unfortunately using the phrase black culture, because I remember black culture from before this the rise of gangster rap and the rest of it, before the sexualization. I mean, I remember the solidarity that really was there and is still there, but people like Mark Parker and the other liberals aren't seeing it because the media is not showing it. If you go digging around through all the truther videos, you notice a growing number of young black men and women, conservative influencers, totally challenging the racist, disgusting Jim Crow white boys like Mark Parker and Paul Vanderklay and their exploitation of the black race. Totally destroying them. Because what this guy was talking about is, well, you're not bringing black culture into my church. He meant ghetto culture. Now, black community would have said ghetto culture in that and made the same statement and said they understand completely. They're not going into his church in order to expand twerking on the sidewalks, random shoplifting gangs in the Walmarts, glorifying street violence. I mean, Chicago had something like close to 80 shootings, and I don't know, I think at least a dozen actually killed just over the Labor Day weekend. And it was a similar number over the 4th of July weekend. Black on black. The violence is out of control. The black communities are fed up. And they are absolutely disgusted with these white, racist, liberal hypocrites like Paul Vanderklay and Mark D. Parker. But what I'm trying to get people to really pay attention to is this is not just that these two guys have this attitude. There's hundreds of people with these attitudes. They don't count. But these guys are part of a very well organized radicalization funnel. And if you look at the shootings, the church shootings, like this most recent one against the Mormon church up there in Michigan, that was somebody that would be identified as a MAGA. I don't think he was really MAGA, but he was a Trump conservative. But, and also there was something about that shooting that was personal. He had a girlfriend issue with a Mormon girl. That came out of the history. It wasn't 100% politics, but a big part of it was driven by theological propaganda programming, because he really was focused heavily on the fact that the Mormon faith is quite different from other Christian groups. But that's not an isolated case. Look at the assassination of Charlie Kirk. People are saying that Robinson, the shooter, the accused, was conservative, raised by a conservative family, but had been radicalized left wing in the last couple of years. And he got involved. Excuse me, I'm going to pause this for a second. There, are we back on? Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, the radicalization. We are seeing this group, this particular group, because it has its roots in, as I said, that I'd say CIA adjacent left wing political group known as Cicada 3301 slash Pizzagate Isaac Cappy. They're a satanic group. Paul Vanderklay is a Satanist. In fact, it's stuff is coming out about Jordan Peterson that's really interesting because a lot of people had questions about him because he did talk out of both sides of his mouth. But he's such a good talker, you couldn't really argue with him. But apparently, he is actually an atheist who was riding the Christian propaganda vehicle. And there was a political move behind him. I really even wondered at one point before his career imploded, I was wondering if he was actually going to make a play to be the replacement for Trudeau. But then he kind of imploded with his drug addiction and other stuff happening. Paul Vanderklay was part of that circle. Now Vanderklay is trying to help everyone pull it together. We're going to find somebody else they're going to push forward. In the meantime, I've noticed that the people that Paul Vanderklay most clearly interfaces with and pushes in this cult building thing are seriously mentally ill. I mean, I hate to say that Grim Griswold is seriously mentally ill because he's very creative and he knows what he's doing. He's not mentally ill, but he's definitely, yeah, he's got a personality disorder. I mean, he's very, very hostile and nasty. My first encounter with him, which was totally friendly and open, and he didn't know who I was or anything, he attacked immediately. And he put up a clip that somebody had sent him. So he's working with a circle of people that quickly give him material to use against people. That's how the organization works. And he put up an obscure, hard to find clip of a 6-year-old interview with me in which I was speaking about this death cult. Hold on a second. Okay, in which I was speaking about this death cult from 6 years ago. It was a New York podcaster who was looking into the Cicada 3301 group and how they were destroying people, threatening, harassing, doing real extortion. In fact, I think one of them just pulled off a major extortion against Michigan State University. They do litigation extortion where they get you involved in a lawsuit and then we can settle. I'm going to sue you for all these thousands and thousands of dollars, but we can settle. And then they end up with a nice chunk of change. And everyone accepts a gag order from the court to just go away. That's how that litigation grift happens. And that's a big part of the Cicada 3301 group, besides the fact that they're hackers. And Grim Griswold put up that interview to make it very clear to me who he was. And I was shocked. And when I spoke about what he did, if Paul Vanderklay were even partially a decent person, he would have questioned. He might have made up some kind of way of apologizing for Grim Grizz, not really meaning anything by it or whatever, but he didn't. Not one word. And I posted a comment to Vanderklay before I started really criticizing him because I didn't think that what Grim Grizz did was at Vanderklay's direction. I thought Vanderklay doesn't really know what Grim Grizz is. But then, of course, as I began to look at Vanderklay, I thought, oh, he knows exactly who Grim Grizz is and what he's doing. So I had put a rather lengthy comment explaining to Vanderklay how Grizz had taken that interview, which was entangled with an act of terrorism that happened here on the Texas coast in 2019, that my name was involved in because Grim Grizz's pals started sending emails to people in Texas claiming that I was an environmentalist radical who was trying to destroy the port. Now, people know me. They know, and they saw pretty quick. In fact, one of the people involved with that did get arrested. Didn't spend too much time in jail, but the police did let me know there are others that they got bolo on them. They show up down here, they will get arrested because they tried to, when they were doing that scam on the port thing with putting my name in these emails, And I was able to show, look, they're just carbon copying to me. I'm not part of this. And I was able to reply to all the people they sent it to and explain, will you please go to the Texas Attorney General and try to get this looked at? I reported it to all the authorities myself. And when they made contact with the local police, because they were calling the local police, pretending to be members of my own family, because I'm elderly, they figured they could kind of get some way to silence me by putting themselves in some kind of family relation. They and these people are Democrats. They're insane. They believe that the police can tell you to shut down your YouTube channel. They can't do that. And the police don't. We don't do that. We don't care what somebody says on YouTube. If she's made a threat to you, show us the clip that it's a real threat and file a complaint. But if it's just that you don't like what she's saying, you're out of luck. And they try. One of them pretended to be a member of my family, sent them on a welfare check. The other one was pretending to be a police detective, trying to convince them that I'm a highly dangerous, nasty person. Partly based on the fact that, yes, I was arrested in 1972 during one of the VVAW protests. We were actually at Westover Air Force Base, which doesn't even exist anymore. So all you're going to see is that I was arrested for disorderly conduct in Chicopee, Massachusetts in 1972. But actually, 500 people were also arrested that day because we were going to stop the B-52s from taking off. Yeah, we were pretty serious about what we were doing. We didn't go around attacking anyone. When we protested, we had training before joining the protest at the campus and on colleges. We went through training sessions of exactly how they had people role playing the part of the police. This is what the police are going to do. They're going to come to arrest you. This is how you go limp. And it was the Martin Luther King system, the Mahatma Gandhi pacifist resistance system. You just go limp. And I told the story that day. I had listened to somebody doing some martial arts talking lecture at the campus, and he had said that you can turn yourself into an unliftable, unmovable object by imagining bricks one at a time, and you can pile and you meditate and you form this mental image. And so in the intensity of our sit down at the Air Force Base, and we were all in a circle, um, we were singing that song, like a tree near the water, I shall not be moved. We were singing Give Peace a Chance, all our protest songs. So we were focused. And I said, yeah, I'm going to try that, just for funsies. I started to focus on this mental image of the pile of bricks. And the cops were going around the circle, lifting one person at a time, putting them on the bus to take them down to the station to be booked. And it was all very peaceful. A lot of friendly banter back and forth between the cops and the protesters. And they came to me, they couldn't lift me. So they went on, they continued around. And finally, it ended up with me and one friend of mine from the college just opposite me in that circle. They couldn't lift either one. Her, they couldn't lift because the cop didn't know how to grab her because she was very buxom. And she couldn't help it. She wasn't like modern females on the campuses that dress like sluts. In fact, it was cold that day. We were all in winter clothes. But they just didn't know how to pick her up without, they were trying to be gentlemen. It was kind of funny. But at the same time, they couldn't pick me up. And it was when I noticed the humor of what was going on with the two cops who were talking to each other about how do we pick her up like gentlemen. And she's just sitting there being herself. And when I noticed that, it broke my concentration. And all of a sudden, the cops who were trying to pick me up, like, boom, suddenly I was light as a feather. And I was, because I wasn't fat like I am today. I weighed a lot less. But anyway, that's the kind of protest we did. And we won. Okay, we won. We ended that war. And we ended the laws against interracial relationships. We ended the lunch counter and bus ride public transportation apartheid. The Democrats, the Mark D. Parkers, the left winger white boys, all want to bring that back. And they want to make sure that black folks know nothing except violence and sex culture and gangster rap. That's all they want. Black folks don't want that, and they've been saying so. There's a growing movement of very angry black conservatives who are fed up with seeing their churches overtaken by these fast talking race grifters, race hustlers. That's really the phrase people used to use, race hustlers. And that's what Mark D. Parker is. He's a white boy acting like a race hustler. Paul Vanderklay. I challenged Mark D. Parker in one of my last videos. You want to talk about black folks in politics? You want to start recruiting? Why aren't you guys going down to the black neighborhoods and telling them about the wonders of Estuary and inviting them? You got Grim Grizz getting people to pay his ticket all the way over there. Why don't you pay the tickets for some black folks from the black neighborhoods? Because they won't fall for it. They won't. Because they're fed up. And now that ICE is getting rid of the illegals, I mean, Mark Parker wants to say that it's a kindness to take your black brother that's part of your country, your neighbor, and keep him out of work. He can't get a CDL and drive a truck. But somebody coming up out of a tunnel under the border walls gets a license that even says doesn't even have their proper name on it. They don't even have to pass a driving test. They just get handed a license. They can take an 18-wheeler down the road. And Mark D. Parker thinks it's Christian to support that. And now, getting back to what I was starting to say about Trump and DHS and ICE, ICE has been picking up the illegal gangs, putting them in the detention centers. They've had time to start talking to some of these people. They're finding out who they're working with. Now they're beginning to bust the truckers who are running prostitution. In fact, just yesterday or the day before, I guess it was the day before, there was a federal raid on an auto mechanic shop here in Corpus Christi. And at first it was just like for 2 days, just wow, all kinds of different federal and state and local police agencies were all over that. And everyone has known that was a dirty place to, if you want to do dirty street stuff, you'd go to that particular little garage. And there's one of them in every town. There's more than one in every town. So nobody really thought about it. But now they're starting to come out with the explanations of what the indictments are about, what's really going on. Yeah, trafficking, human trafficking. And that's what's going on now. DHS is moving in on the Mark D. Parkers and the Paul Vanderklays and the Grim Griswolds. You think I'm exaggerating? What on earth is Parker really doing? And I started to talk about Vanderklay amping up the politics because they're moving their cult thing from we are just friendly, lovely, warm, fuzzy fellowship to theological arguments to now it's the politics is coming forward full while Parker continues trying to draw people into his race hustling lynch mob crap. Vanderklay is trying to sound like an intellectual with his World War II history stuff. And over in Twitter, over in X, he's putting up the anti Catholic stuff. He's putting up things claiming that the French Revolution was really caused by Catholics, which is shocking if you know anything at all about history of the Catholic Church in Europe and the French, the war against the clergy. I mean, it's a Calvinist lie, but it's a modern satanic lie. And I don't think Paul Vanderklay is at any way a Christian. He grew up in a Calvinist Protestant family. He followed in his father's footsteps. He learned how to be a pastor as a child, and he knows how to play the role, and he's a LARPer. But he's married to a Rudolf Steiner Waldorf school educator, which is totally occult. He's promoting occult stuff, nihilistic Marxist stuff through Grim Griswold, pretending it's conservative. You dress it up with a little bit of conservative sounding politics, but everything else underneath, promoting the idea that there's no agency. You don't really have any control over what you do. You've got to, and if you don't have control, then who does? You start looking for somebody to control you if you don't believe you have control. No agency is part of the brand that they're promoting. And Vanderklay is pushing Mark D. Parker's lynch mob, race hustling crap. And I was really glad to see these other members of that TLC circle. They weren't really confronting Parker too hard, but they were distancing themselves. They were pushing him a little bit to answer what's he really up to. I don't think they agree with anything I'm saying. I think if they listen to my videos at all, they think I'm nuts. But they are still have enough critical thinking to ask what he's doing. And there was another person I got to mention, someone who shows up in a different channel, who's not American, who said that when he first noticed me, I was attacking Vanderklay, and he didn't know what was going on here. And he said, lately, though, he's watching what Vanderklay's doing, and he's beginning to see my point. He didn't say too much more than that. He still left me on the fringe where I probably do belong. But he said, there is something weird going on there. And that made me feel good. That's okay, it's worth it. Because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to get people to say, Denise is right, Vanderklay's wrong. No, I don't want that. I want you to do what that guy did. Say, well, she's a little off, she's a little weird. Don't know what she's talking about. But now I'm looking back at this and I'm wondering, I'm asking what's going on. Now, the problem with what happened with this guy is he didn't notice me until I began to confront Vanderklay. He doesn't know. He probably totally missed the first round where I had no suspicions about Vanderklay, but I was attacked by Griswold and I questioned and I left that comment to Vanderklay, which Vanderklay totally ignored. He did not reply to it. He never acknowledged that I told him the full story of what happened to my daughter, of the cult interview, and what this guy, Griswold, was really doing. He totally ignored that. If he were a decent person who was just accidentally caught up in the social circle, he would have said something to try to unruffle the feathers. So I said, well, I don't think Grim Griswold really, maybe somebody took advantage of him by sending him that clip. I don't think he really knew what he was doing. Even though that would have been a lie, it would have been a lie that would have shown a spark of desire to at least appear as a decent human being. Excuse me a minute. God, I sure hope those pauses are really cutting that out. I have to stop because I'm coughing too much. But Um, I mean, it's possible that all Vanderklay is doing is collecting mentally ill people that he can have fun manipulating. He might think it's going to be a lot of fun to see what kind of violence Parker is really able to engender, and he enjoys watching Grim Griswold play his little occult chaos magic mind games with people. He enjoys, I've noticed that he's choosing really personality disordered people. I mean, Parker has called himself a prophet. He's declared himself to be a prophet in the tradition of the Old Testament prophet. Uh, King David had a companion named Nathan, who was a prophet advisor to the king. You got to have some kind of delusion of grandeur to think that that's going to describe your role in life today. That's Parker. He really believes that. He did a whole interview with a guy named Rod Hare, who, like I said, I'm glad to see the TLC people, men, finding their hind legs and standing up on him. Rod Hare was confronting Parker a little bit more um, articulately about what he's doing. And Parker came right out and admitted that he lies as part of a manipulation game. He sees it all as a game that he excuses because it's a weapon. It's part of how he's doing warfare for the Lord. Yeah, that's cult right there. That's jihadi, violent cult right there. And Vanderklay is choosing to push into leadership Parker, Griswold, and this other guy, Luke Thompson, is not as important, but he's kind of like an emotional touch point for these people. Also, clearly, some personality disorder thing going on because it's all focused on relationship bonding. And there's all kinds of people that are active in that circle that Vanderklay could use to push forward into leadership if he wanted to. He's choosing the ones that are most prone to be manipulated by a sadistic cult builder. And that post that Vanderklay put into X claiming that the Catholics created the French Revolution is coming right alongside the fact that these people, they are behind. I mean, that guy that shot up the Mormon church, excuse me again, while it wasn't 100% political, he had some kind of personal grudge match going on over, I don't know, the Mormon church told him he had to remove certain tattoos before they would allow him to convert, and he was dating a Mormon girl, and he didn't like that. But he also had a whole thing about calling the Mormons the Antichrist. And the Mark D. Parkers and the Paul Vanderklays are working in this pseudo conservative, this left wing group that is deliberately masquerading into the conservative world to find, groom, radicalize, and exploit committed young men who they can, if they can use their cult propaganda politics to successfully isolate. That's how these killers, the one that killed, that's accused in the Charlie Kirk assassination, the one that's accused in the Michigan Mormon temple shootings, and there were several others that I guess the guy that did the Butler attempt on Trump also masqueraded as a MAGA. And we've known this about these groups. The Hosakata 3301 Isaac Cappy group, that's all 100% violent anarchist, chaos magic, left wing, occult with a capital O, masquerading as conservatives to turn Christian against Christian, to turn everything into a blame game. But just look at what's going on. And I hope that more people in the TLC and elsewhere that are coming across these videos is probably going to be, I believe, that after their next estuary session, which is coming up in October, they're probably going to really start pushing the recruitment. And um, I hope that more of these young Christian and Christian adjacent guys that are involved in these discussions will start calling them out and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're a hypocrite. Parker is demanding what kind of church the different ones go to. He doesn't even go to church at all. He says his background is in the holiness, which is the soft sit Pentecostal, that's where he gets his delusions that he's a prophet. He doesn't have to go to church because he's that close to God already. But he raises money for Paul Vanderklay's officially registered bricks and mortar church, which he does not attend. And he gets on about with them, which gives Paul Vanderklay deniability. Because if Vanderklay had somebody who was really part of his church doing the fundraising that's going to support the violence that Parker wants to support, Vanderklay would very clearly, his group, his church would be held responsible. But by having an outlier do it, an outsider, he's got deniability. I don't know what he's up to. We just thought he was a nice guy. Kind of weird, but duh. It's like, no, pal, you know exactly what you're doing. And you know what? So do we. God bless some, have mercy on some, and to hell with the rest. Denise Matteau, over and out.